Hello and welcome back to America's Forum right here on Newsmax TV. I'm John Bachman, and with us is J.D. Hayward.
And, John, we can report that Russian military intervention in the Ukraine has sent stocks, bonds, and the ruble crashing. The Moscow stock market fell 11% yesterday at the cost of $60 billion to Russian companies. The central bank spent around $12 billion of its reserves to prop up the ruble as investors reacted to the Ukrainian crisis. The ramifications felt around the world, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average losing 200 points, the S&P dropping 14, and the Nasdaq sliding down 31. Now, joining us via Skype is the editor of the S&A Global Contrarian, Kim Iskyan. And Kim, it's very good for you to Skype in and join us here on America's Forum.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Kim, so the markets, they took it on the nose yesterday, but the Dow Jones at least appears to be up at this point, up over 200 points. Why are we seeing such a quick rebound after yesterday's losses?
Well, what happened is that overnight U.S. time, Russian President Vladimir Putin came out and said, okay, it looks like we won't be moving forward with military activity. The fear was that the Russian military would move into eastern Ukraine. It was already in Crimea. The concern was that it would broaden its attack or its action. And, well, if that would have happened, if that were to happen, then it would be anybody's guess what would happen next. And clearly markets were quite concerned that would be the next step. The fact that it wasn't, at least at this point, was certainly taken as well, it's relief of sorts.
And that relief, Kim, I'm interested. Do you think that Putin, because we realize this is the new Russian Federation, not the Soviet Union, the bottom line, world markets, did they sober him up somewhat or at least get him to pull back? Do you think it was the power of markets at work here?
You know, I think that might have been a small factor, but Vladimir Putin is at this point, he's quite savvy about how markets work. So perhaps the reaction was a bit more than he had anticipated. I think he fully recognized the potential macroeconomic cost of what he was doing. I think it was more, you know, Vladimir Putin is in some ways a very smart man, and he's playing the long game. He's playing the long game for himself. He's playing the long game for Russia. So this isn't the last chapter. And at this point, it did not make sense for him to move forward. Perhaps it will at some point in the future. I think more, maybe he was surprised by the reaction somewhat, but I think more it was just not really in his original plan to move into eastern Ukraine at this point.
And we talked about, Kim, the impact this had on the markets with the downfall yesterday, the quick rebound today. Another thing that was impacted by a lot of the news out of the Ukraine were the commodities markets. We saw a price peak in oil as well. What are the commodities doing today in response to Putin's kind of taking a step back?
Well, what had happened, well, Gazprom is the world's largest gas company. It has about 18% of total global reserves. It's the world's largest traded energy company. The EU, the European Union, receives about a quarter of all of its gas from Gazprom, and that goes through Ukraine. So, well, what's happened in the past is when Russia has wanted to send a geopolitical signal to Europe and or Ukraine, it's actually turned off the taps of gas. And the threat is always kind of looming that if the EU ticks Russia off enough, all it has to do is say, all right, guys, I hope you don't mind being in the dark for a little while, being in the cold for a little while. So what happened yesterday is that natural gas prices rose quite sharply. It's calmed down a little bit today since that fear has receded somewhat. Gold prices, I think, were also up quite sharply yesterday. That's receded somewhat today. That's kind of the relief rally in reverse for those commodities that there was concern that there would be some sort of a bottleneck or problem in supply.
And Kim, let's go from the petrodollars, if you will, to the agribusiness, the Ukraine known as the breadbasket of the former Soviet Union, the Russian Federation. Huge corn and wheat market, huge producers there. With this situation unfolding, does it put a crimp in that agricultural production? Could we see huge rises in those prices for wheat and corn from the Ukraine, or a cutoff of that supply?
Well, you know, as soon as Russia starts saber rattling, I think all the cards are kind of tossed up into the air. And if military action were to proceed, then you could expect just a bottoming out of the Ukrainian economy. when you look at how Ukraine has performed since the end of the Soviet Union, it's one of the underperformers of the former Soviet republics. And that's saying quite a bit, because that's a gang of countries that has not done particularly well in the past 20, 22 years. So I think that the infrastructure of Ukraine, that is the production infrastructure as well as the transportation infrastructure, getting a lot of those products out, it's not in tip-top shape, to put it mildly. So any sort of disruption, any sort of upending of employees, of how people work, of how people get to work, could definitely disrupt the flow of those commodities. And yes, I think there would be that potential for higher prices in those commodities.
We've got just a little bit over a minute and a half left here. One last question I want to ask you. The United States is now offering up $1 billion in subsidies to help the Ukraine should they be cut off from Russian natural gas here. We're also hearing about calls to export more United States-based natural gas to the Ukraine as well. Are either of those going to do enough here to offset any losses they might receive if Russia does turn off the taps on natural gas?
$1 billion is a drop in the bucket. It would help for a little bit, but Ukraine already owes Gazprom several $billion dollars. And the thing is, at a certain point, it's not about money. On the one hand, the Russians would say, oh, it's about money. They haven't paid us back. On the other hand, Ukraine is now a geopolitical ball that's being kicked around. And, you know, the Russians will do what they please, regardless of what kind of money the United States might pour into it. With respect to natural gas from the U.S. to Ukraine, I'm not sure about how the actual dynamics or logistics of that would work. If the pipelines and infrastructure exist, that would certainly be an option, though.
All right, the call for more pipelines, more way to get this natural gas around the world. We're seeing this boom here in the United States, a real opportunity here if we could get it to other parts of the world. The technology with the fracking as well, very important. Kim Iskyan, thanks so much for being interesting insight on this topic, the financial implications of the situation in the Ukraine.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Kim. And
Thanks.
now, we just had Kim weigh in. It's your turn to tell us what you think about these stories of the day and the ongoing crisis in the Ukraine.
That's right. You can tweet us or tweet me directly, John B_Newsmax. We'll get JD's up there tomorrow. Any of us here at the program, we'll get them, though, at Newsmax TV, hashtag America's Forum. That's on Twitter. You can email us, connect@newsmaxtv.com. Of course, find us on Facebook, as so many have been so kind to do. Great comments coming in today. Keep them coming. Newsmax TV on Facebook as well. We'll be right back with more coming up here, including what's making news on Newsmax.com, and a look at what's ahead on the Steve Malzberg Show as well. We'll be right back after this.